This car in front of me is another Boricua. My radio will work.
When they saw this big ball of red stuff in the sky. Moore said it hovered, dropped something on fire into the park, and then flew away. According to an article by Richard Warner published on the website of the Historical and Preservation Society of Pottawatomie County, Council Bluffs, Iowa, at 7:45 p.m. that same night, 3 teenagers driving to a store observed what seems to be the same falling red ball. They went behind some trees in Big Lake Park. Then there was a bluish-white flash, and 2 arms of fire were seen that shot out more than 10 feet into the air. Thinking there had been some sort of crash, they drove to the park to investigate. They got out and walked towards a glow in a dike along the road. When they got close, they saw a glowing orange blob with a bluish-white crystalline center. One of the witnesses described it as looking like a great big sparkle. Material reportedly dripped over the sides of the dike that was hot enough to start a small fire in the ground. According to an article by Craig Jarrett for the Southwest Iowa Daily Ontario, published online on May 16, 2004, one of the teenagers, Tim Drake, told a reporter in the Omaha Sun in 1978 that he saw 4 men, 18 to 19 years old, drive by in a tiny foreign car. As they passed, the men asked if the teens saw that thing fall out of the sky too. The car then turned around and drove away. According to Jarrett, he had also told the Sun reporter that someone from the Air Force had called him and told him not to mention the sighting again. Jarrett talked to Randy James, another one of the 10 teens, who had talked to the Sun reporter in 1978. James said he had never been in a real UFO and described the material as a fluid. He said they picked up a piece of metal about the size of a toothpick and couldn't break it. Which James and Drake described the crystalline center as being unaffected by the heat. While the metal was cold, Fire Chief Jack Moore, lightning responded, on the scene after being called to respond to the disaster. According to author in the Examiner article, once the metal had cooled, the fire department responded, loaded the metal onto a truck and took it to the station. Mike Moore told author there was about 1,000 pounds of molten iron laying on the ground. Moore claimed to have boxes of the metal in his shed. According to him, the torch would only heat it up, the grinder wouldn't cut it, and it couldn't be bent. The metal was brought to the local Griffin Pipe Products Company and Ames Laboratory at Iowa University. Francis Labs told author about the results of the initial tests at Ames. We found the debris we examined to be consistent with smelter slag, very similar to that from a few operations in eastern Nebraska, where they were using auto scrap to make manhole covers, etc. UFO investigator Jacques Follett looked into the case and wrote up his conclusions for an article, Physical Analyses in 10 Cases of Unexplained Aerial Objects with Material Samples, published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, Volume 12, Number 3, pages 359 to 375, 1998. Raleigh's description of the Council Bluffs case begins on page 367, and his analysis begins on page 368. Looking into the likelihood of a hoax, Raleigh considered the possibility of someone pouring molten metal on the ground. To do that, someone would not only have to acquire molten metal, but maintain it in that state during transport. The only company nearby was the Griffin Pipe Products Company, and the works manager, Renton Stewart, informed Raleigh that the company didn't pour over the weekend. Raleigh states the melting point is close to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which would require transporting a brick oven of 6-inch thickness with a large truck, keeping the material at the melting point. His conclusion as to whether or not this was a hoax is negative. For delay also ruled out the possibilities that someone could have melted the metal on site using thermite, that the metal had fallen from a conventional aircraft, or that a meteorite might have impacted the site. He then speculates on why a flying vehicle would have liquid metal on board. He quotes J.R. Bundy of the University of Durham. The high conductivity of liquid metals makes them an attractive means of current production for homopolar machines. So, there are UFOs flying around full of molten metal. It seems we have one more airborne hazard to worry about. It makes blue ice from airport toilets seem tame in comparison.
To find out more about our guest and all others, please visit our website at mysteriousradio.com. And I want to give special thanks to our co-creator and executive producer, Kim Kyle, who brought this show to you today. And working hard behind the scenes, our team of four, I want to thank them as well. Follow us on social media and share the show with others that may like the subjects that we cover. I am your host, K-Town, and you're listening to Mysterious Radio. Hi there, I'm K-Town, and on this edition of Mysterious Radio.
NASA, the UFO Problem by Charles Leary. According to the sighting report forms filled out by Dorothy Governor Jimmy Carter for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena and the International UFO Bureau on September 18, 1973, he and 10 to 12 other men observed a UFO he described as a light that was, at one time, as bright as the moon for 10 to 12 minutes in Leary, Georgia. According to the form, they were outside waiting for a 7:30 p.m. Lions Club meeting to start. During Carter's presidential campaign in 1976, a reporter from the National Enquirer asked him if he would release all the information the government had on UFOs if he was elected. He is quoted in the June 8, 1976 edition of the Enquirer as saying, "If I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I'm convinced that UFOs exist because I have seen one." When he was elected, the White House began receiving letters from UFO enthusiasts who wanted to know when he was going to make good on his promise. One of these is included in the article by Philip J. Klass, headline, NASA, the White House, and UFOs, published in the spring-summer 1978 Skeptical Inquirer. Dear Mr. President, during your presidential campaign, you made the commitment that you, sir, would release to the American people all of the UFO secrecy now held in the archives of the federal government, consisting of various agencies. Your article with this commitment appeared in the June 8, 1976 issue of the National Enquirer newspaper. I have voted for you, mainly for this reason. I do faithfully hope you will not disappoint me as one of millions of citizens who has voted for you. Richard Seegan, the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Johns Hopkins University, who was a deputy to NASA's director of Astrophysics Division, Lam Norris at the time, wrote an essay about the situation. Henry was also an astrophysics consultant at the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. According to Henry in his essay titled UFOs and NASA, published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, Volume 2, Number 2, pages 93 through 102, 1988, this situation prompted White House scientific advisor Frank Press to reach out to NASA in a letter, and Henry included it as Appendix 1. NASA now had what Henry described as a hot potato in its hands, and getting rid of it would mean, in essence, saying no to the president. The letter, dated July 21st, 1977, is addressed to NASA Administrator Robert Froch. It begins with this. Dear Bob, we have discovered that the White House is becoming the focal point for an increasing number of inquiries concerning UFOs. As you know, there appears to be a national revival of interest in the matter with the younger generation becoming involved. Those of us in the executive office are ill-equipped to handle these kinds of inquiries. He wrote that it seemed to him that the focal point for the UFO question ought to be in NASA. He makes two recommendations. The first is that a small panel be put together at NASA to see if there have been any significant findings since the Condon report, and that high-profile people with an interest in the problem, such as Carl Sagan, be involved, as this is a public relations problem as much as anything else. The second is that NASA become the focal point for general correspondence, and that those inquiries which come to the White House be sent to the designated desk at NASA. The reply, signed by Frosch, wasn't sent until September 6, 1977, and is included as Appendix 2. In the letter, it is explained that the Air Force concluded, in the absence of significant findings, that the program warranted no more than routine form letters to inquiries and has been handling the program in that manner since about 1970, and that NASA used form letters as well. It is pointed out that while this is economical, it results in frustration for those making what they consider to be serious inquiries. It is agreed that a NASA panel might possibly discover new significant findings, but before committing to creating such a panel, NASA needed assurance that an inquiry was justified. It is suggested that this could be done by assigning someone to review UFO reports from the last 10 years who would make a recommendation. The letter closes with the promise that such an action would be taken if Press concurred. Press did concur in the course of a letter dated September 14, 1977, included as Appendix 4. According to Henry, word leaked out that NASA was designating him as the project officer for UFOs, and this resulted in class sending him a copy of his 1976 book, UFOs Explained, marked to Richard Henry, with the hope that this may shed useful light on an old controversy and help you and NASA avoid the fate of Tar Baby in the late Dr. Ed Condon. He also says that Robert Schaefer wrote him using Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, letter-headed stationery, warning him to be prepared to be deluged by mail from every kook and crackpot in the country, and even worse, be prepared for letters from the scientific UFO investigators who will appear reasonable and sane enough, yet are true believers in every sense of the word. Henry replied on October 5, 1977, that he hadn't been assigned. Henry explains on page 96 that NASA has a unique vertical management structure and that every piece of correspondence that comes in is copied and sent out to the lowest level members of the distribution chain for which the Secretary feels the information would be relevant. The draft reply is written, and this is sent up the chain and can be rewritten or edited at any point until it's finally signed and mailed by the addressee, who often reads the original letter for the first time. By the time the reply is sent out, it's not clear at which point the reply was finalized, and in matters of policy, it's not clear where any given policy originated. In this case, this worked out to NASA's advantage, as the decision to say no to the president couldn't be blamed on any one person. In a letter to press signed by Frosch, it is explained that NASA is going to continue doing UFO inquiries as it had been, but was open to using NASA labs to analyze and report upon an otherwise unexplained organic or inorganic sample, and was prepared to respond to any bona fide physical evidence from credible sources. Due to an absence of tangible or physical evidence available for thorough laboratory analysis, and NASA's inability to establish a sound scientific procedure for investigating these phenomena, it is proposed that NASA take no steps to establish research in this area or to convene a symposium on this subject. The potato had been passed. Charles Lee is the author of The Flying Saucer Investigators, available at Amazon.com.
To find out more about our guest and all others, please visit our website at mysteriousradio.com. And I want to give special thanks to our co-creator and executive producer, Kim Kyle, who brought this show to you today. And working hard behind the scenes, our team of 4, I want to thank them as well. Follow us on social media and share the show with others that may like the subjects that we cover. I am your host, K-Town, and you're listening to Mysterious Radio.
underrepresented in UFO literature. However, there is a more recent, less well-known case that not only has multiple witnesses, but radar confirmation and a 911 dispatch tape as well. On the night of March 8, 1994, meteorologist Jack Shaw was manning the National Weather Service office in Mesquite. He received a call from an Ottawa County dispatcher dealing with multiple reports of mysterious lights in the sky. The dispatcher wanted to know if there was anything on radar to confirm the reports. On September 3, 2020, Shaw gave his recollection of the events that night to WWMT News Channel 3, available in the written version as well. Shaw explains he was able to manually control the radar with two cranks that allowed him to move it up and down and side to side. This was often done when looking for hair. According to him, he swept the radar over the area in question and got a return that showed an object moving at 100 miles per hour. As he watched, it stopped and hovered, then quote, shot up, end quote. He then saw a triangle formed by three objects 20 miles apart. One object would jump to a spot 20 miles away and the other two would follow and reform the triangle. He says they did this repeatedly. Sean called the FAA control tower at Mesquite County Airport and asked if they were getting similar returns. The controller there reported seeing, quote, 3 aircraft in formation, end quote. No transponder codes. Sean was told by the NWS not to speak to the public about what he'd seen. According to him, their main concern was to avoid becoming a UFO reporting center. Sean says he's faced ridicule and feels more comfortable speaking about his experience since the U.S. Department of Defense released videos they confirmed were of, quote, unidentified aerial phenomena, end quote. The case was looked into by Mutual UFO Network Michigan Chief Investigator Daniel Snow, and is listed as case 62470. Snow reported there were over 300 witnesses, provided an overview of the occurrences that night, and included a recording available from the 911 dispatch with the attached conversation between the dispatcher and Shaw. The dispatcher is heard saying they received 60 calls reporting UFOs. Shaw is heard describing 3 to 4 returns the size of that hit runway, and he tells the dispatcher the plane showed up as pinpoint-sized blips. The tape was obtained by Mike Walsh when he was an investigative journalist for the Mesquite Chronicle, Lakeville. Walsh, who is now an attorney, was interviewed by Marie Cisneros, herself a Michigan MUFON investigator, for the Mesquite Channel series Paranormal Mesquite, Lakeville, in January of this year. He describes his habit of getting to the office early, which, quote, was my mistake that day, end quote. His boss told him they'd been getting a lot of phone calls about, quote, unusual activity in their hauling, end quote, and asked him to look into it. Walsh began by calling the police department. They dismissed the reports with comments like, quote, yeah, there were lights in the sky, they're called planes, end quote. Walsh then got the idea to send a Freedom of Information Act request to the 911 dispatch service via fax. The fax was received at 9 a.m. By 9:15 a.m., Walsh was contacted and told to come over and pick up the tape. He was given a cassette tape and he listened to it in his car. He tells Cisneros, quote, blew my socks off, end quote. The first caller is a woman who described seeing, quote, unusual warm, end quote, across the street with the voices of her excited children in the background. A police officer was called to confirm her sighting and did so. Walsh then describes the interchange between the dispatcher and Shaw and how, quote, make your hair stand on edge, end quote. One instance is when Shaw exclaims, quote, oh my God, what is this, end quote, when he spots a particular return. The story made international news in the Mesquite Chronicle was besieged by calls from news organizations all over the world. Walsh received 2 calls from pilots, one from American Airlines and the other from United Airlines. They said they saw, quote, a flash of light that went in front of them, end quote. One pilot said, quote, it looked like it was out of Star Wars, end quote. Walsh tells Cisneros people were concerned about their jobs. Sean was concerned enough to approach him at his house the Sunday after the story broke, begging to stop reporting on it. Walsh sent a federal FOIA request to the NWS for radar tapes and was told, quote, machine does not record, end quote. Describes the NWS response as being, quote, so fast and so sophisticated, that was impossible, end quote. Walsh interviewed the woman right at the beginning of the tape. He describes that she saw a, quote, circular worm-like object, end quote, blinking lights that was, quote, able to navigate, end quote. It moved off slowly to the southwest and discharged, quote, what appeared to be 2 other craft, end quote. Went across Lake Michigan and disappeared, quote, at a high rate of speed, end quote. While Walsh found the case mystifying, he wasn't convinced that people were seeing seeing nothing unusual during the 2-hour sky watch, they headed home at about 8:45 p.m. As they were approaching Whitville on Route 21 South, Gordon, who was driving, spotted something strange off to his left. Gordon pulled over and both men got out of the car. Gordon described seeing a large craft coming towards him that had no wings and no monocoque, and a multicolored strobe light on its right side. Danny Hall, a former commercial pilot, estimates that it was 1,000 feet away from them at an altitude of 1,000 feet, and that its diameter was at least 2 football fields. Hall says there were what looked like 3 huge picture windows lit from inside on the back of the craft. According to Gordon, the red ball of light approached the craft from the left and it docked with the craft as the craft disappeared into some clouds. He compares what he witnessed to watching images in a video game. After the craft was out of sight, both men realized that neither one of them had managed to get footage of the object. The next night, however, they did manage to get pictures, and with the pictures not yet developed, organized a press conference. The conference was held on October 23, 1987, and Gordon says that during the night before, he received a phone call from someone who told him that the CIA was very interested in the UFOs being reported in North County. He says he continued to receive anonymous calls from people discouraging him from continuing his investigation and telling him it wasn't his place to be interfering with defense matters. Gordon reported that his house had been broken into after the press conference, and he suspected that someone had been looking for the photos, which were developed showing indeterminate streaks of light. He then got a chance to take some better pictures on December 2nd, when he, his wife, and daughter were walking in the family car in a mall parking lot. A large object came into view in front of several witnesses in a school bus full of kids, and Gordon met his camera. According to Gordon, the single object became 4 flying disc shapes that disappeared as soon as they were photographed. 4 photos that Gordon presents show 4 distinct shapes, going from teardrop to ball to flying disc to egg shape. By the end of December, there were over 1,500 sightings reports. Reports include multicolored carousel-like objects and objects that seemed like a cross between a helicopter and a plane, with no noise. Gordon says he called the Pentagon to talk to the defense spokesman and told him, "We do not deny UFOs exist. The government confirms they exist. But we do not pose a threat to the populace of Wythe County." Gordon says he asked how they knew there was no threat. He was told, "I can't tell you, but there is no threat to you." Well, it seems the UFOs were not a personal threat to the general populace of Wythe County, where he would be speaking about the Wythe County UFOs. He received a phone call from a retired military intelligence officer. The man told him that he should tape the conversation they were about to have, so that if anything were to happen to him, it could be proof he'd been warned. On a tape provided by Gordon, the man is heard telling Gordon that because of his own investigations into UFOs, Dave had given his son leukemia, which proved to be fatal. The man said that he had information that the government was not happy with Gordon's investigation and that they might use skin contact chemicals to cause harm to him or his family. In spite of the warning, Gordon went and spoke at the conference. He says that although there had been an outbreak of hepatitis while he was there, he came back without contracting it. He asserts that had he contracted it, he and others would have believed that he had gotten it. Gordon reported that less than 2 months later, 2 men showed up at his door. They gave their names, said they were from the Richmond Gazette, and said they wanted to ask him questions about the Wythe County UFO sightings. Gordon let them in, and one man asked questions while the other walked around and took pictures. They stayed for about 45 minutes, and as they left, they said they'd send Gordon a copy of the article. Gordon never received anything from the paper, and when he called to inquire, he was told that the men never worked for the paper. Weeks later, as Gordon was organizing his photos, he found that the negatives from the wall photos were missing. He and some friends examined the developed photos and could not determine why anyone would have wanted to steal those particular negatives. 2 months later, Gordon collapsed and was taken to the hospital where he was diagnosed with severe exhaustion. He was advised to cease his UFO investigation, and he followed that advice. According to him, he wouldn't report his sighting if he was given another chance. This segment ends with him saying, "Don't look up, because once you look up and you tell somebody what you saw, your life is changed forever." Because Gordon's story involved threatening phone calls and mysterious visitors, it's known that collections of many black tales. It's been neglected is that his UFO story is just one of them that came out of Wythe County Empire. For those those interested in exploring further, links have been included in the written version of this blog, available at podcastufo.com.
To find out more about our guest and all others, please visit our website at mysteriousradio.com. And I want to give special thanks to our co-creator and executive producer, Kim Kyle, who brought this show to you today. And working hard behind the scenes, our team of four, I want to thank them as well. Follow us on social media and share the show with others that may like the subjects that we cover. I am your host, K-Town, and you're listening to Mysterious Radio.
Statements and opinions about guests of Mysterious Radio are not to be considered as endorsed by sponsors or affiliated networks. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this podcast without the express written consent of Mysterious Radio is strictly prohibited.
Get ready for a night filled with conspiracies, strange places, the paranormal, UFOs, legends, and myths from around the world. With your hosts, K-Town, on Mysterious Radio.
All right, thank you for joining me tonight on Mysterious Radio. I'm your host, K-Town, and if this is your first time finding the show, I want to welcome you. And for those returning, thank you for your continued loyalty and support. All right, for my special guest tonight, I have author Frank Joseph, and he's going to discuss the remarkable aspects of the Atlantis civilization. There is so much to these people that many don't even realize. I know we refer to them as an ancient people, but I find that very weird because most of the time when we think about ancient, we think about primitive, right? But Atlanteans were far from primitive. They were highly advanced. So if this intrigues you, then this interview is guaranteed to hold your full attention. All right, I want to welcome my special guest tonight, author Frank Joseph. He's going to be discussing his book, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age. Frank, I want to thank you for joining me tonight on Mysterious Radio.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Likewise, and I cannot wait to talk to you about this. I want to first start off, though, by allowing you, Frank, to take a moment to tell us what inspired you to look into this civilization of Atlantis, and including Palaeo and Edgar Cayce in this book.
I would say it was the failure of my education when I was going to the university back in the 1960s, and I found that the way that history was taught to the students, just the way it is pretty much taught the same way today, was inadequate. It just did not answer a number of questions that my fellow students and I had. And it was really over quite a long time afterwards that I, by chance, just about came in to hear about Atlantis, which I always considered just a myth, just a legend, a story. But as I investigated more thoroughly, I found that there were more historical facts to back up the existence of such a missing civilization. And it was only over the course of about 2 years before I finally began to change from a skeptic, considering the alleged existence of Atlantis, until I thought there was something historically to it. I then began traveling around the world for a number of years. I became really quite obsessed with determining, at least to my own mind, if such a place actually existed. And it was only after, it was close to about almost 10 years, that I finally concluded that beyond a shadow of a doubt that this place actually existed. It was important not just because it was a kingdom, a beautiful place that was destroyed in a very dramatic way. It was important because it was the first, the mother of all civilizations. That before that time, human beings had not reached a high enough level that we could call civilized, but with Atlantis, there was that step into the modern world. And they made mistakes. They achieved very high level of culture, in some regards higher than our own. And yet they must have made some mistakes that led to their destruction. And that's really been my quest ever since, even though I've been studying this phenomenon now for over 30 years, going on 40 years, I'm still in the process of determining what did these people do? What errors did they make? Because they were so similar to ourselves. And I think that that's important to find out. How is it that a civilization that lasted so long, that achieved such high levels of technology and culture and political and economic influence throughout the world, they were actually the first global civilization. Not only the first civilization, they were the first worldwide culture, and they lost it all. Was it only a natural disaster, or as we're told by people like Plato and Edgar Cayce that you mentioned, they were somehow responsible for their own demise? And so that's a question I'm still interested in investigating. Perhaps we can touch on some of that tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Now, where do you think Atlantis was located and how big was it?
Well, first, Atlantis has been searched for all over the world, and discoveries have been made here and there. But no one can agree exactly where it was. But I think that the problem with that is it's like looking at different parts of the elephant. Atlantis itself was not a continent. That's something that we have to put aside. It was a fairly large landmass, but it was not a continent. And Plato, when he discusses Atlantis, uses the Greek word nesos, which means island, not continent. The problem with Atlantis is that it was, however, a very huge political phenomenon. It was an empire. It had colonies from North and Central America, all across the Atlantic to northwestern Africa, all through Europe. So their power extended really across the Mediterranean, almost to Egypt, and as far west as the Americas. So they left their impact in a great many different parts of the world. So when archaeologists find different things, they say, oh, this is Atlantis in the Bahamas, or this is Atlantis in parts of America, here's Atlantis in Africa. What they're doing is they're finding parts of the Atlantean Empire, but the capital itself was located on a large island which no longer exists, that suffered a natural catastrophe around 3,200 years ago. This was the last gasp of that civilization. This island, to answer your question, lay about 300 miles due west of the Straits of Gibraltar. In other words, due west of, say, Portugal and Morocco. If you were to go on a straight line out from Gibraltar for about 300 some miles and go down, you would find the remnants, and I hope someday that the remnants will be found, of this destroyed island. It's very possible that as recently as the 1970s and the early 1980s, the Soviets found what appears to be the remnants of this lost civilization. That's a whole other story in itself. So the archaeology is reaching a point where technology will allow us to look underneath the mud and the silt that is covering the ruins of this lost civilization. When that technology has reached a high enough level, I feel it's inevitable that the remains of this civilization will come to light.
What gave Plato this idea that Atlantis existed in the first place?
The story of Atlantis he heard from a previous Greek. Of course, Plato lived about 300 years before Christ, about 2,300 years ago. And the story of Atlantis was known pretty much among academics. It was not as popular then as it is today. The first Greek to introduce the story of Atlantis to the Peloponnesus, to Europe, was a man by the name of Solon, S-O-L-O-N. He was one of the most important figures in all Western history. He was the first man to codify law and introduce that law. He's known as the great Athenian lawgiver. And while his fellow Greeks were considering his legal proposals for this first legal system, this first codified law system, he went on a kind of a holiday to Egypt. And while he was in Egypt, he was visiting a temple, a huge temple, which barely exists. It was found, I think, recently, over the last 10 or 15 years. Only the foundations of it still exist. It's called the Temple of the Goddess Neith, N-E-I-T-H. And in this vast temple, Solon was visiting, the priests were showing him around this wonderful example of Egyptian architecture when they told him about this one particular column that was inscribed with this long hieroglyphic text. And this hieroglyphic text explained the story of Atlantis how it rose to terrific power, and that it was engaged in a series of almost world wars, huge wars against Egypt and the Near East, and against Solon's ancestors, the Greeks, during the Bronze Age. And so this whole story on this obelisk, this hieroglyphic text, was transcribed word for word by Solon into Greek, and he brought it with him back to Athens, and his duties as a legislator kept him from devoting the rest of his life to this story, but he turned it into a great epic, like Homer wrote about the Trojan War in the Iliad, and now Solon was going to write a similar epic about Atlantis. He died before it was completed, although all of his notes and the transcription of the story were handed down to successive generations. And Plato had a copy of Solon's translation, and he decided to put it into two of his dialogues called the Critias and the Timaeus. And in these two dialogues, Plato relates most of Solon's story. We have what appears to be about 90% of it. The last part, which deals with the destruction of Atlantis, was either lost or censored. Nobody knows exactly what happened to it, but we do have most of that text. And because Plato was able to preserve or document this text, we have the story of Atlantis. Plato himself was one of the most significant players in the development of modern Western civilization. All of our ethics stem from him. So the story of Atlantis comes on extremely high authority. Both Solon and Plato were major players, not just in classical Greece, but in the development of Western civilization. That's how the story came from Egypt. One more thing on that: the story of the Atlantean war against Egypt had been written down many centuries before, and parts of it are also still transcribed in a temple called Medinet Habu, or the Victory Temple of Ramses III, who was one of the last of the great powerful Roman or Egyptian pharaohs. And that text dates back to about 1100 years before Christ. So this is, I'm telling you this to explain the lineage of this story, how it got to be known. Ramses III had his historians, his bureaucrats, write down everything that happened, how he was able to defeat this invasion, and that story is somewhat transcribed into Solon's account, which comes down to us today, 23 centuries later.
All right. Now, how did Edgar Cayce describe the people of Atlantis?
Edgar Cayce was probably the most outstanding psychic of the modern age. He was a very simple man. He was a very religious man. He was born and raised in Kentucky in the late 19th century, and he knew nothing about Atlantis. Had the vaguest notion of it, never heard of it. He was only interested in two things: his religion and healing people. He had this terrific gift for diagnosing ailments that people had that could not be cured by the medical science of their time. In other words, from about 1910 until his death in 1943. And he became world famous. People came from all over the world to ask him if he could prescribe some kind of treatments for their unique medical conditions. And during the course of helping people to explain what was wrong with them, he would go into a kind of a light trance. And during this trance, he somehow would access some dimension somehow in which he would help people. Well, while he was in a trance in the 1920s, early 1920s, one of his clients asked him while he was in this light trance how this client, came to be a sufferer of this illness. And Edgar Cayce replied, well, this illness that you now suffer is similar to the condition you had when your soul was in Atlantis. And the man asked him, what's Atlantis? And Edgar Cayce, upon waking up, said, Atlanta, Georgia? He knew nothing. He didn't know what Atlantis was. And then that seemed to open some kind of a door for Edgar Cayce, because after that he gave literally many hundreds of readings in which Atlantis was described. And when you read the Casey materials on Atlantis, they're really very intriguing. There is one volume that the ARE, called the Association for Research and Enlightenment, has released, one volume of his life readings which deal exclusively with his pronouncements on Atlantis. The ARE was established by Edgar Casey back in the 1930s. And you can still go there and visit their marvelous library today. You can read Edgar Casey's life readings about Atlantis and other things. Now, his story of Atlantis is both different than Plato's and similar to it. It's different than Plato's because it goes back to an earlier time in Atlantis. Plato's account is at the very end of Atlantis, the last really decades or century of its existence, where Edgar Casey's readings go back much earlier, into the early period of Atlantis. Atlantis, we have to understand, was not like our civilization. It was only a couple hundred years old. Their civilization, the Atlantean civilization, was many thousands of years old and had gone under numerous experiences and periods of destruction and renewal. And Edgar Casey's readings go back to this early period of Atlantis. He describes the Atlantis people, and again, in this regard, is similar to Plato. They were highly virtuous people. They're very religious people. They lived very close to nature. That their religion was a kind of a worship of natural law. They regarded God's law as natural law. They believed that God makes his will known to human beings through natural law, and that by worshiping and understanding natural law and applying its beneficial aspects, people are worshiping God in the proper way. That's the basis for the Atlantean religion. People lived that way for a very long time, and in so doing, they achieved just a splendid level of cultural and technological heights. According to Casey, some of the things that they did are similar to what we have today, and others surpass what we have. I'm thinking especially, according to what Casey says, that they had an incredible medical science that allowed a kind of a non-invasive surgery. They had mastered certain energies similar to, but not exactly the same as laser light, and on a technological level, they mastered flight. Some of it is hard to swallow, hard to believe, but the consistency of Edgar Casey's pronouncements really has to give you pause. In other words, he'll say something, about 1923 or 4, about the Atlanteans mastering flight, for example. And then that same subject will come up maybe 20 or more years later. And it's like he just takes up where he left off 20 years before. So there's a consistency in what Casey had to say, which is very remarkable. He describes the Atlanteans as not only very brilliant people and a very technologically and culturally adept people, but a people that allowed all these aspects of greatness to go to their heads, as it were. They became self-sufficient, self-indulgent. They became rather lazy, and their level of technological achievement was so high that they eventually became to believe that technology was a kind of a god. And Casey says in there that technology is a wonderful servant, but a very cruel god. And that's apparently what happened. The Atlanteans evolved into a materialistic people, that they believed that their technology could make good any moral infraction that they might have done. And they became imperialists. By that I mean that they became empire builders. They conquered other people, colonized them, whether they liked it or not. They became great lovers of luxury, and they went through the same sort of a cycle of other civilizations, that when they declined, they become more and more avaricious and acquisitional, until they began to be interested more in conquest of other peoples and other lands than they were in their own cultural development. And so they ended on a bad note.
Before we move on, and you said that they began to believe that technology was sort of a god. Now, I heard a previous interview of yours, and you said that they had crossed the moral line concerning technology. Is that what you mean by that?
Well, I think what I mean by that is that technology, as Casey says, is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with materialism.
So
we
cool.
live in the material world. But when you are at the point where you feel that the technology itself is all important, and that human values become secondary, increasingly minimalized, then I think civilization is doomed. That's doomed itself because it becomes so self-indulgent that it becomes desensitized to the sufferings of other people. And so rather than being a society that was bringing high culture and greatness to the world, they wanted the world for themselves.
Okay. All right. So did Edgar Casey say anything about their ability to travel outside of our planet?
That's a very interesting question. It's a controversial question because there are some readers and experts in the Casey material that suggest that just exactly as you mentioned. I've not been able to find that, quite honestly, to my own satisfaction. However, there is one Casey reading which is really interesting, where he talks about the Tuai Stone. The Tuai Stone was the largest and the most powerful technological center of the Atlantean civilization. The Tuai Stone, that's an Atlantean word, by the way. It's one of the few Atlantean words that have come down to us. It means stone of fire, or fire stone. It was a large, beautiful, beautifully cut crystal. And apparently the Atlanteans were able to use this crystal in some kind of technological sense to bring terrific power to themselves. And that this Tuai Stone could do many things. It could transform various types of energy and various applications. Some skeptics have said, oh, how ridiculous, there's no such thing, but I can point out a place called Silicon Valley, right? I mean, that's where all our crystals are made. Without Silicon Valley and all those crystals, we wouldn't have our electronic society today. So it's not beyond. But anyway, to answer your question, this Tuai Stone, according to Casey, in this one reading, just in passing, he's talking about the various things that Tuai Stone can do. And one of the things he mentions is that the Tuai Stone allowed the Atlanteans to have communication with civilizations beyond the Earth. He never elaborates. She never goes on to admit. You have to understand, he's in a trance state. He's in an altered state of consciousness. What gets me is that nobody at that time asked him, what did he mean by that? They asked him other questions about their health and so on. But it's just that one in passing where he says that the Tuai Stone allowed the Atlanteans to have a kind of a communication with those cultures far beyond the Earth. That's kind of chilling, actually. But other than that, I've not personally been able to say, oh, he's definitely talking about traveling to other worlds. It's very possible. The craft that he describes are not unique. That's the interesting thing. The craft that these flying vehicles were also known to the Hopi Indians. They call them Patu-Latuas. And that is a really terrific confirmation, I think, of what he's talking about. Because the Hopi Indians, in their creation stories, tell about how their ancestors lived on this great island in the Pacific, a series of islands, they say, that suffered a natural catastrophe. And their ancestors, the Hopi ancestors, go all the way back to the survivors of that catastrophe. And these people, these ancestors of the modern-day Hopi, supposedly, according to Hopi tradition, had these Patu-Latuas, which were these flying machines that were almost identically described in Plato's description. Also, on the other side of the world, the people of the subcontinent in India, this is Indian traditions that go thousands of years back to the Rig Veda and beyond, talk about the Vimanas. And the Vimanas are also described as these ancient flying machines that were operated by these people who lost their kingdom across the sea after it suffered a natural catastrophe. So here you have these two people separated by other on opposite sides of the world from each other. People in India and people in the southwest of America talking about these ancient flying machines. Here comes Edgar Casey, who knew nothing about Vimanas, who knew nothing about Pachacutic. He was an uneducated, very decent man, but he didn't know anything about ancient history. He's describing the same thing. So I have a tendency to believe that we have to keep an open mind when it comes to these ancient flying machines. Study the beings beyond the world if you go and see them. So I think that's really that much we do in case Church says, yeah, they have their communication that they can reach other people. So why not go there? Just like I say, it's a pity that the people at this time, his clients, say, oh, that's pretty cool. Did we ever see the monitors ever go to this other place? Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about this for a moment. Now, do you think that they were possibly given some of this technology to their demise? Like some of the things that they had, they really were supposed to have, which eventually caused their destruction?
That's a really interesting question. Of course, with human beings, goes back thousands of years. Even before Atlantis, there are indications on some of the cave art that goes back to, we're talking like about 18,000 years ago, that suggest that there were beings from other worlds that have come here from time to time. The UFO phenomenon, as you know, is hardly the recent thing. It's been seen by peoples around the world for thousands of years. So it's only natural that the Atlanteans also connections.
Bye bye.